Getting the best CPU cooler in 2026, it can be extremely confusing. How big a cooler do you need for your CPU? What's the benefits of going air versus liquid cooling? What are the best CPU coolers on the market in 2026? Welcome back to PC Builder, I'm Jason. We're going to quickly break down the key information that you need to buy the best cooler for Ryzen and Intel CPUs in 2026. Then we're going to make specific product recommendations at every budget level for both air and liquid coolers. If you get value out of this video, please give it a like and of course subscribe for more cool PC content. Let's jump into it. This video is sponsored by Seasonic. For PC enthusiasts looking for ultimate performance, Seasonic's flagship Prime TX 1300 delivers. ATX 3.1 and PCIe 5.1 compatible with 1300 watts powering even the most insane PC builds. The Prime TX 1300 now comes with an updated 12-volt 2x6 cables for increased safety and reliability with RTX 50 series GPUs. And Seasonic's digital fan control means the PSU stays cool and quiet under load. If you are looking for no compromises performance in power, thermals, and noise, check out Seasonic Prime TX 1300 using the link in the video description. So should you go with an air versus liquid CPU cooler in 2026? The good news is both are solid cooling choices for just about any CPU, but each has their own place in terms of cooling capacity, noise, and aesthetics, as well as value. Air coolers in 2026, they're more powerful and affordable than ever. You can now cool high-end CPUs like the Ryzen 9950 X3D with air coolers under $50 in the US, and they're an unbeatable value for budget builds. As long as the cooler design ensures good contact with the CPU, the only real concern here is the fan, which does typically last up to 10 years, and it's easy to replace on most models. But air coolers, they're not perfect. Air coolers can ramp up noise quickly under sudden loads. They're definitely bulkier for your build. They may need more vertical clearance, and dual tower models can overhang the first two RAM slots. But what about liquid CPU coolers in 2026? There are two kinds, custom loops and all-in-one liquid coolers, or AIOs for short. I'm going to focus on AIO coolers because custom loops, they're expensive and they're quite complex. In 2026, AIO coolers are more affordable than ever, starting at around $45, and they can outperform air coolers under heavy loads, though most builds won't really reach that level. AIOs also offer a more consistent noise profile, sleeker visuals, and options like LCD screens without covering your RAM slots. However, they do come with a potential failure point, the pump. In 2026, liquid cooler leaks are almost unheard of, but a dead pump means no liquid flowing in the cooler and thus no cooling. And for budget builds, the extra cost, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense. An AIO also has to be installed properly with at least part of the radiator above the pump. I'll link our AIO installation guide in the video description for more information. So is air or liquid CPU cooling better in 2026? Well, for budget gaming PCs, air, it's honestly the only way to go. The immense value of air coolers are insane. For mid-range and higher-end builds, personally, I do prefer liquid coolers for the aesthetics and the more consistent noise profile, but in 2026, there's honestly no wrong answer here. It's really going to be up to your preference. For air coolers, most downdraft style CPU coolers are relatively cheap, and some CPUs like the Ryzen 5600 or i5-12400, they come with included downdraft style coolers that we refer to as stock coolers. Now for space-constrained Mini ITX builds, there are more powerful and more expensive downdraft style coolers. Budget tower air coolers start between $18 and $35 US, and they're incredibly powerful upgrade over the downdraft style coolers and a staple of budget and mid-range PC builds. Dual tower air coolers start at around $30 US, and they make a huge leap up in cooling performance, now able to cool even the most powerful Ryzen CPUs. Liquid AIO CPU cooler categories are named by the size of the fan that they use, either 120mm fans or the less common 140mm fans. An AIO cooler with two 120mm fans, it's called a 240mm AIO. Three 120mm fans is a 360mm AIO. As the number of fans goes up, the radiator also gets larger. An AIO that uses two 140mm fans is called a 280, and the biggest is a 420mm AIO using three 140mm fans. Single fan AIOs are only about as powerful as a budget tower air cooler, and given the cost, I'd only consider these for space-constrained Mini ITX builds. 240mm AIOs are the most common. They start at $45, and 360mm AIOs start at around $60, and they can be incredibly powerful for extreme CPU heat loads. Let's talk about thermal paste. Now, how much do you actually need to use? Well, testing has shown us that using too much paste, it's fine. Not using enough paste does hurt performance. So I err on the side of slightly too much paste, typically making a thin X with 4 very small dots in between. Then I use a paste spatula or other rigid edge to spread the paste evenly across the CPU before I install the cooler. Now, virtually every CPU cooler in 2026 will come with enough paste for at least one application, so you don't necessarily need to buy your own, but a tube of Arctic MX4 with the paste spreader, it's only about $7. Now, personally, I prefer the Arctic MX paste lineup because it spreads easily, while I have had some challenges spreading other paste. Some coolers come with pre-applied thermal paste on the bottom of the cooler. This is generally fine as well. Thermal paste will typically degrade in 3 to 5 years, depending on the paste, and you'll need to clean it off and reapply it, which is fairly easy to do. Check your paste for its estimated lifespan. Now, you can also buy a high-performance thermal paste like Thermal Grizzly Duranaut for about $20 on Amazon, or $11 direct from Thermal Grizzly. But I'd only recommend this as an option for higher-end PC builds, otherwise spend that $20 getting a better cooler. There are also thermal pads available as an alternative to thermal paste like Thermal Grizzly's Cryo Sheet, but again, this is an additional cost. I'd only really do this for higher-end builds. Let's talk about contact frames for CPUs. You can easily purchase these for about $10, but you actually need one? Short answer, no for AMD, no for most Intel CPUs, only maybe for like unlocked i7 and i9 13th and 14th gen CPUs like the i9 14900K or 14700K. CPU contact frames replace the stock CPU retention mechanism on your motherboard. Intel's mechanism applies uneven pressure, but this only really matters for high heat CPUs like the 14900K. Installing a contact frame means removing the motherboard retention mechanism, which carries a small risk of damaging the motherboard pins. That's why I don't necessarily recommend it for AMD CPUs or most Intel CPUs, including the Core Ultra 200 series. Even for the i7 14700K beginners, you should probably skip it. Okay, so how big of a CPU cooler does your CPU actually need? For the most popular budget gaming CPUs like the Ryzen 5500, 5600, i5-12400F, 13400, 14400, along with locked Core Ultra CPUs like the Ultra 5 225F, these come with perfectly adequate stock coolers. You can add a budget tower air cooler for better noise and thermals. For the i5-12600K, Ryzen 5700X, I recommend at least a budget tower air cooler. For Ryzen 5000 X3D CPUs, I would go to at least a dual tower or a cheap 240mm AIO. Moving up to mid-range gaming CPUs, we've got the Ryzen 7000 and 9000 CPUs in the Ryzen 5 lineup, like the Ryzen 7600X, 9600X, and 7500F. I want you to avoid the Ryzen 7400F and any Ryzen 8000 series APU. For Ryzen 5 7000 9000 series CPUs, I recommend at least a budget tower air cooler. And honestly, this is probably all you really need as long as your case has good airflow. The Ryzen 7500F and 7600 non-X do come with an included stock cooler. It's fine, but given how cheap budget tower air coolers are, I'd switch it out. Intel mid-range gaming CPUs like the 13th and 14th gen unlocked i5 CPUs, 14600K or 13600K, along with the Core Ultra 7 265K and 27K are more in the mid-range as well. These are harder to cool. I recommend at least a dual tower air cooler, though these are well suited to a 240mm or larger AIO cooler as well. Moving up to the higher end of gaming CPUs, we've got the Ryzen 7 CPUs in the 7000 and 9000 series. This is like the Ryzen 7700X, 9700X, and the big X3D CPUs like the 9800X3D, 9850X3D, and the 7800X3D. These are a little tougher to cool than the regular Ryzen 7 CPUs for sure. I recommend a minimum of a dual tower air cooler for both performance and noise. And these CPUs are also great with a 240mm AIO or larger cooler. For higher end Ryzen production CPUs in the Ryzen 9 range for the 7000 and 9000 series, so we're talking about the 9900X, 9950X, and the X3D variants like the 9950X3D, a good quality dual tower air cooler is absolutely fine, but depending on how high the heat load is, I would definitely look for a good quality 360mm AIO for the most consistent noise performance. Now for high-end Intel production CPUs like the i9 14900K, i7 14700K, and the Core Ultra 7 and 9 CPUs, while a high-quality dual tower air cooler is fine, my personal preference is for a quality 280mm or 360mm or higher end performance AIO cooler. Let's jump into our best CPU cooler 2026 recommendations. Everything is listed down in the video description. Now price is obviously subject to change, so check out those links for current pricing and availability in your region. And we're gonna add new coolers if we see new values pop on the market. All right, let's start off with the best budget air coolers in 2026. Then we'll go to more mid-range air coolers. Then we'll jump into AIO coolers, LCD ones, and then of course Mini ITX as well. And I'm gonna go rapid fire through these budget tower air coolers because honestly, while these are the top performers that I'm gonna show you, really hard to go wrong with a lot of these coolers for like an i5 lock CPU or a Ryzen 5 CPU. I'm gonna start off with a brand I really like, which is ID Cooling SE214XT. They are phasing out the older version that we may have shown some B-roll on, like this, where they got the heat pipe caps on the top, and they're going for a more refined aesthetic now with the V2. And they're not just doing this on this cooler, this is where ID Cooling is going. So if you're looking for that more refined look, maybe this is a cooler that you want to focus on. You can still get the older one right here. However, the black one's completely sold out. If you want that more industrial look, Thermalright does that. We'll talk about them in just a moment. And then of course we got white with RGB, and then we've got a blackout version as well. These are relatively cheap. You can often find them for as little as $15 sometimes, all the way up to $30 depending on sales. Then we got Thermalright. They do the industrial look really, really well. I know a lot of you out there like that more industrial look. So what you're looking for here is they've got the heat pipes and they're just crimped at the top. There's no top plate or anything. Now they do have versions of these coolers where they do have a more refined aesthetic. We'll go through those in just a moment. I like the Assassin X Refined SE ARGB. If you go into Amazon, you'll see like 27 different versions of the same cooler. So I will link this down in the video description, the one that kind of I prefer. If you don't want any RGB, this is a good one here. They also have a white RGB, and then they've got a white with no RGB. So the fan itself is white, kind of hitting all the various aesthetics. They also do have a more refined version of this. This is called the Evo. Comes in white, comes in black, and then comes in a blackout version here that they call dark. Here's a cooler that I think is really, really awesome if you want to add some additional functionality and just honestly cool aesthetic to your PC build. This is the Assassin X digital version. Comes in 4 different versions, 2 black and 2 white. I'll show you the difference in just a moment. The key thing here is this digital readout on the top. You're gonna plug this into your USB 2.0 header on your motherboard. You're gonna use their software to display kind of whatever you want here in terms of temps and things like that. That is super awesome and just a great way. I mean, look, $23. That's a great little feature to add to a cooler for only a couple dollars. Comes in a white version with RGB, black version RGB, black version with no RGB on the fan. Maybe some of you out there like that. And then similarly for the white version as well. All right, moving over to Cooler Master. If you built a gaming PC anytime in like the 2010s to 2020, you're probably familiar with this one. This is a Cooler Master Hyper 212 Black, and this is a cooler that everybody went absolutely bananas for back in the day. And if you want it, it's still a great cooler right now. They have refined it a couple of times. They've added some thinning on the fans, things like that. $26 for the standard version, or you can get the Pro here for $30. A little expensive, does often come down to about $20 on sales though, and it just adds a little bit of RGB and then kind of a cool aesthetic on the top. They also do have kind of a more budget breakdown model here if you're in a market where Cooler Master is the major supplier, and that's quite a bit of markets out there where you maybe not find ID Cooling or a lot of Thermalright stuff. This is another good one to get, just a really basic cooler that's RGB. And then here's a cooler that I absolutely love for design aesthetics. I go crazy for the Cooler Master Hyper Halo fans. These things look amazing because not only do you get the RGB on the fans, but then you get a double ring, and they look amazing. They look amazing in an AIO cooler, and they look amazing on something like this. It's just gonna add another little design aesthetic. I kind of wish they'd come out with a digital version of this with that fan. That would be awesome. Right now it's on super sale for $21, which is crazy because typically it's more like $30, as is the white one here. And just closing it out just to give some additional coverage, and I like the Vetroo V5 quite a bit. I kind of feel like they sell it for a little too much Vetroo, $28, probably should be more like $22 at the max. But the reason I want to point this one out is that they also offer, this is something Vetroo does, they also offer a pink aesthetic. They have pink PC cases, they got pink PSUs and PSU cables too. So for people looking to do like a pink aesthetic build out there, really good choice. All right, let's jump into mid-range air coolers here. These are gonna be dual tower air coolers. They're gonna run anywhere from about $25 all the way up to $60, $70, depending on your design aesthetic. And I will say the first two I'm gonna show you are essentially tied. They trade blows in all the benchmarks out there for super high heat loads. But honestly, almost any of these are going to do really well for like a Ryzen 7 CPU or like a 9900X kind of CPU, Ultra 7 265K. So let's jump into these. The number one here that I absolutely love because it's always the cheapest is the ID Cooling Frozen A620 Pro SE. Don't get the original A620, make sure you get the Pro SE version. They fixed some things that were originally wrong with that. And this is, again, one of the top performers here. It's tied with the Phantom Spirit, which we'll go over next from Thermalright. But the reason I love this one so much, $27. It is always the cheapest. If you just want the top performer and the cheapest, this is the one to pick up. All right, let's jump over to the other one here. That's the Thermalright Peerless Assassin and Phantom Spirit. Those are essentially interchangeable, and Thermalright has about, no kidding, 36 different versions of this cooler, including the Phantom Spirit versions as well. You're essentially looking for a dual tower here. They've got their great fans on them. And they either come in a more industrial look like this, or they come in something a little bit more refined that we'll take a look at in just a moment. Remember to check the links in the video description. I'm going to link the ones that I think are kind of the best priced because they're not all well priced. These are with 120 millimeter fans. There is a version out there with 140s. Don't really need that unless you're like a 14900K or something. This is $37 for the ARGB, more industrial looking one. There's an all blackout version as well for about the same price, no RGB. Then you've got the non-RGB industrial looking one for $32, which is super cheap. And then we've got a white ARGB version as well. If you're looking for something a little bit more refined, you want to add that digital readout like we saw on their single tower air coolers, I think these are great. This is the Thermalright Peerless Assassin 120 Digital, and just like we did with the single tower coolers, it comes in a black with RGB fans, it comes with white RGB fans, it comes with black non-RGB fans, and then white non-RGB fans as well for $46, and I think it's just a great value. Jason, where's Be Quiet out there? Be Quiet's doing okay. I think some of their coolers, at least in the United States, are a little bit overpriced. Be Quiet, maybe you could cut some prices, especially now with RAM prices a little bit more expensive, but I do like their Pure Rock Pro 3 lineup here. The LX one is their dual tower with ARGB on it. They have a complete blackout version. I think it's a little expensive for $55. I didn't mention some of their single tower coolers. Any of their single tower coolers are also really good. However, just a little bit more on the expensive side. And finally, just because of their global reach, I want to make sure I mention the Cooler Master Hyper 620S. Now, this is another really, really good cooler. It's not as high performance in terms of noise and thermals as either the id Cooling or the Thermalright ones that we looked at, but you can find this just about everywhere in the world, especially in markets like India, where maybe you can't find some of those other ones. And it is a pretty good performer. All right, let's jump to the best AIO coolers in 2026. So this is like the best 360 millimeter cooler in 2026 and the best 240 millimeter AIO in 2026. Like, Jason, what's wrong with 280s? I have just had my fair share of cases saying that they're 280 compatible and then not being able to fit them in, or the holes are off and I got to get a drill out. I have just decided, why do they even exist? Just go either 240 or 360. And honestly, these days, because the price difference is so small, a lot of times I just go 360 if the case will fit it. And so we're going to start off at the budget end and we're going to work our way up here. The two things you really want to pay attention to when you're buying a liquid cooler is the fan noise and the pump noise. I tend to never set my fans above 90%, even at the highest thermal set point, just because you've already maximized airflow and then you're just pushing cavitation where the fans are just shaking, and that's going to just produce a lot of extra noise and not very much cooling for them. The other thing I typically do is I set the pump speed at 100%. Can I hear it? If I can, I just dial it back until I can't basically hear it, and I set it as a steady state. And then 5 degrees before thermal throttle limit for the CPU, I will let it go to 100%. So let's jump into these. I love some of these budget coolers. Look at that price, $53. So we're gonna start off at the budget end. These are decent, but not amazing performers, and we'll work our way up. If you're just looking for something amazing, Thermalright I don't know how they make these so cheap. This is the Aqua Elite V6 V6. I don't know what happened to V5, by the way. That one just disappeared. But we're on version 6 of this cooler. And of course, it comes in white, it comes in black, and it comes in 240 millimeter as well as 360. But look at the price difference there. Was it like $8? I would just get the 360 if your case will fit a 360. Obviously, if you're doing micro ATX, that's probably not the case. You'll get a 240. These are really good performers. However, for those higher heat loads, like Ryzen 9800 X3D, 7800 X3D, I would probably go with something a little bit more high performance. I really like the aesthetics of these Sama coolers. Sama contacted me recently, just to full disclosure, said, hey, we want to send you a cooler. I have enjoyed this cooler. And on top of that, what I'm going to say about it is that I've checked all the benchmarks for them. It's quite good. In fact, a little bit better than that Thermalright that I just showed you. $59. And I love the prism here. The fans look nice, relatively easy to install. And again, comes in black, comes in white. You want the L70 version, not the older version. But for $50 for a 240, that's really crazy, and $60 for a 360 millimeter. A cooler I've used in a number of builds, including our 7800X3D build guide last year in 2025, is the AIO Cooling FX360 Infinity Mirror. However, you might want to spend $10 more and get the digital that I'm going to show you in just a second, because it's pretty cool. And this, again, better performer than what we've just looked at. But we're starting to get into overkill range for most CPUs here, unless you've got like a 9850X3D and you're gonna overclock it or something like that. For $79, and this thing looks amazing. I really like it. Pump's quite quiet on it. Comes in some really interesting colors, by the way, if you're into that. But it comes in black, comes in white, comes in 240 and 360 ARGB versions. And let's start talking about digital screens, because this is the latest thing for coolers, not just the air coolers like I showed you before, but obviously the LCD screens where you can just project anything you want on that thing. We use the AIO Cooling FX360 digital in our 9850X3D build guide. You can check that out, link down in the video description. I love this cooler. I know the screen size, some complained it was a little too small. However, I like the ring around it. You can control that. I turned it white. It looks amazing. Yes, I wish the screen was a little bit bigger, but I found their control software pretty easy to use. And for $89, I mean, what do you want? If you want to go 240 and like a smaller form factor build, like a micro ATX, $75, that is crazy cheap. These things used to cost like $250. Thermalright also has a pretty good one here. They've got a slightly smaller one that I'm not crazy about. I like this one. The screen's quite a bit bigger. If you're looking for that bigger screen, this is the Thermalright Grand Vision. Decent performer in terms of a cooler as well. It's got a 3-inch screen, 3.4-inch screen that attaches magnetically, and it looks really, really nice. A little bit more expensive though at $114. All right, let's jump into the best AIO CPU coolers in 2026 in terms of performance. So these two coolers I'm going to show you basically trade blows at the top of the chart, but I'm going to show you the first one first because this is the best one in terms of Ryzen CPU coolers, although honestly the other one's not far behind. That is the Montech Hyperflow ARGB 360. This unseated, yes, the Arctic Liquid Freezer 3, which we'll talk about in just a second, not too long ago. And relatively affordable, $89 for the black RGB version. There's a white 360, there's basically $90 as well. And there are 240 millimeter versions of it. Now I will say, for those of you out there who like, Jason, I don't want that big RGB thing on, that's fine. There's also a non-RGB version of it that Montech has introduced just for you. It comes in black, comes in white, it comes in a 240, and it comes in a 360, and it's about $10 or $15 cheaper than the original. Then of course we've got the Arctic Liquid Freezer 3 Pro 360. This is the non-RGB version in black. And then we've got a white ARGB and black ARGB too. You can pick whichever you want. Now, the difference between this and the Montech is that this fan here is a VRM fan. I don't know how necessary this is these days, because these days motherboard VRMs are so massively overbuilt on the higher end motherboards, which is typically where you're going to find a cooler like this that probably not as necessary. But again, it does add a little bit of cooling. It has been tested. So 2 thumbs up there if you do a lot of like long renders or Blender work and you walk away from your PC running at full steam for an hour or so, maybe that's going to be beneficial to it. The difference here is that this does slightly better on the Intel side than Montech does. And the Montech does slightly better than this does on the Ryzen side. Otherwise, these are the 2 top performers out there. There is a contact frame that comes with this for both Intel and AMD CPUs. It's optional. You don't have to use it if you don't want to. Honestly, I think either one's a great choice. If you're not looking for an LCD screen, you just want more of a digital readout for your CPU or GPU temperatures, and you want something kind of, I hate to use the term idiot-proof, but this is pretty idiot-proof. The Montech Hyperflow super high performance cooler that we just looked at also comes in a digital version for like, what is it, $25, $30 more. And it's pretty simple to use. You just either select CPU or GPU and then the temp in either Celsius or Fahrenheit, and you can turn it off if you decide you don't want it at all too. It's really, really cool, I think, for about $120. If you're looking for something way more high end and you want like an awesome looking screen, the Tryx Stage 360 is kind of a newer iteration of their Panorama, which we will take a look at in just a moment. This is an IPS screen, it's not OLED, but look at that. It actually lays flat and it's 2 screens side by side with a mirror on there. Just gives a really cool effect to this, and you can control these screens separately. Another thing Tryx does is it has its own processor, so it doesn't require any CPU resources, which is really super amazing, I think. Again, you are paying $209 for it, and these are super high performance coolers. And then of course, I think the GOAT in terms of these is the Tryx Panorama SE, the second edition 360. The original edition of this wasn't a very good cooler. It had an awesome screen. They basically fixed the cooler part of it in the second edition. That's the one you want to buy. And it still has the amazing WOLED screen on it. It's actually a curved screen. You can do all kinds of stuff with this. Tryx has great software. This comes with a 4-core CPU to control it. So again, you're not using any of your own CPU resources. I don't know how CPU intensive those are, but for $279, this is kind of the GOAT. Let's jump into the best Mini ITX PC coolers out there. Remember, when you are cooling a Mini ITX build, any small form factor build, if you cannot fit a standard like budget tower air cooler or a 240mm all-in-one liquid cooler, and some of the cases now will allow for those kinds of things, then you're going to be looking for a low profile cooler, or you're going to be looking probably for like a 120mm AIO that you can kind of sneak in there. So let me give you some options here. The first thing to think about is the fan size on the motherboard itself. Is it going to bump into, often those ITX boards have kind of, they jump up real quick in terms of the overall VRM heatsink there. So just size that appropriately. This comes with a 90mm fan, obviously 120mm is a little bit bigger. And then the X after it is the height. So this is the height of the overall CPU cooler, including the heatsink on it is about 36mm. So it's got a 92mm fan. It's $25 for the black version. For the version you're not ever going to see in another build, you can pick it up for like $20. 39 cents. I love these Thermalright coolers. I know a lot of people say knock to a knock, but they're so expensive and these give very similar performance. Then there are also 120mm versions of it. Now this is going to be a little bit of a taller CPU cooler. This is actually going to blow through the heatsink here, and it's also going to give you some additional airflow onto the VRMs as well. Maybe that's important to you, maybe it's not. $33 basically for the black RGB. There's a white RGB if you can see it, and then there's just kind of an industrial version if you have a build where you're not going to see it whatsoever. id Cooling has a number of these as well. I have used the id Cooling IS55. It's relatively high performance, especially if you're going to use a CPU like a 9800 X3D in a super tight PC build where you're not going to be able to get any kind of bigger cooling in there. I like this one quite a bit for $39. And then honestly, if you can't get a 120mm AIO in there, Thermalright Aqua Elite, they stopped making these after V3 in the 120mm size, but Corsair makes some as well. You're basically just looking for the cheapest, decent 120mm. I like this one because the pump noise isn't that loud and the fan performs pretty well and the radiator is nice and thin. Remember, everything is linked down in the video description. Check those out for current pricing and availability in your region. I've also linked our How to Build a PC playlist with guides on things like CPUs, GPUs, CPU, GPU combo, motherboards, and more. If you got value out of this video, please give it a like, of course, subscribe for more cool PC content, and we'll catch you on the next one.